friend, but I gotta Google or Wikipedia 'em because there's so much. So I'm gonna like quickly give what a Wikipedia version of Greg, and then I'll go on to just a little bit more things. So Greg is from Los Angeles. He attended Dixie State, where I didn't know he was the valedictorian, but of course, served a mission in Brazil. Graduated from the University of California as a dentist, also valedictorian there. I just want one of my millions of kids to, I don't know, it doesn't even need to be a valedictorian. Geez, Greg. He has a PhD in pathology. He's married to Jalyn Rasmussen, and they live in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Greg was at the National Institute of Health for how long, Greg?
15 years.
Wow. And at Johns Hopkins University. He co-founded Viron Systems, which you're going to have to talk about this because I want your version of what happened with that. So I'm going to leave it from there because I want you to just kind of talk about what you discovered. And so Greg became a Mormon historian. He's done books such as Leonard Arrington, David O. McKay, some on the priesthood, and most of you might know it goes on and on and on. And most recently, where is my book? This book, which I don't know if any of you have read, but it's Gay Rights and the Mormon Church. And it's really a history of sort of how gay rights have evolved over the years within the doctrine of the church. And maybe this book will be around forever and cited forever. The research in it's amazing. So a few years ago, you guys have seen these pamphlets that we do, I think. Greg's is this one right here, Science versus Dogma. I went to a Leonard Arrington, is that what it's, no, McMillan.
No, the Sterling McMurran lecture.
At the university, no, it was at the Salt Lake Library. What was it, maybe 2.5, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it was sponsored by the University of Utah.
Packed room where Greg gave this address, and I think we all had our mouths open the whole time, and everybody ended with a standing ovation. So we were like, Greg, can we please turn that into a pamphlet? And, you know, this kind of is, Greg, would you say kind of a small version of this book? Like a summary?
It's a summary of one chapter of the book because the pamphlet deals just with the biology. The book deals with a lot of history, most of which isn't directly related to biology.
So I will quit talking, but I guess this is my chance to tell Greg thank you for all he's done for Encircle since basically day one. Someone knew Greg and called him from my house when we were working on kind of the proposal on what Encircle would look like and what it would be. And Greg was like, well, I can edit that for you. And I was telling my husband, I have Greg Prince editing our magazine. Like, this is so cool. So anyway, Greg's been a huge supporter of Encircle and all we've done and given a lot of wisdom and advice along the way. So forever grateful to him. But tonight, instead of doing the Q&A, we're going to just let Greg talk, and then he'll open it up to questions that Kayleen and Ken will facilitate, if that sounds okay. I'd rather just let Greg talk about what he thinks is important for parents and allies and, you know, from his experience. So, Greg, you're on. Thanks for being here.
Well, you opened the door for me to talk about the pediatric research, so I better respond to that first. I got into research because of an extraordinary mentor in pathology at UCLA. And the most important thing he taught me was to work on important things. I'd never heard of RSV. When I walked into his lab, he said, I'm going to have you work on this because this is the most important virus affecting infants worldwide. And he said, if you do something important with this, you might make a difference. But he said, I have spent my whole career working on a virus of mink. He said it was interesting, but it wasn't very important. And that really served as a mantra for everything I've tried to do since then. I see so many people who have opportunities and abilities, but they squander them by working on things that just aren't very important, when they could tackle something that's really important and maybe make a difference that could affect a lot of people. And I don't know why they don't make the choice in what to me is an obvious direction. Life's going to be difficult no matter what you choose, so why not choose to do something that really is important? And that circles around to this book. Uh, I was not aware for most of my life how important the topic is, particularly within the context of Mormonism. My awakening didn't come about because of my gay sister, because to me that was never an issue. It started to come about a week after the Prop 8 election in 2008, when I was contacted by Helen Whitney. Helen is an independent producer. Many of her films have been broadcast on PBS. The one that our crowd is most familiar with was called simply The Mormons. It was broadcast in 2007. It was a joint production of Frontline and the American Experience. It had 3 or 4 times the normal viewership of those programs. And I think it made a difference in the way that Mormonism is viewed, or at least temporarily. Helen told me somewhat later, like in 2012, she said, I've had a lot of people over the years come up to me and say, because of your film, I've moved from here to there in my view of Mormonism. And then she said several of them subsequently said, Mitt Romney moved me right back, for whatever that's worth. But a week after the Prop 8 election, she called me and she said, I need your help because my dearest friend is Andrew Solomon. Andrew writes for The New Yorker. He's a gay activist, not to be confused with Andrew Sullivan, who is a gay activist who writes for The Atlantic. The two of them often are confused with each other. She said, Andrew is my best friend. He has turned on me and said, how could you have had anything good to say about this evil church that helped to pass Proposition 8? And that really was the beginning of my consciousness being raised. She said, I need your help to try to repair our friendship. We corresponded for the better part of a year, and eventually I got the temperature down enough that I said, Andrew, help me to be part of the solution and not the problem. What do you mean? I said, I'm on the editorial board of Dialogue. Write an essay that we could publish. And he said, okay, I'll do that. But he was in the middle, or probably closer to the front end, of a massive book called Far from the Tree that some of you may have read. It was also made into a documentary movie and was behind schedule. So I never got the essay. Finally, I called and said, all right, how about I come up to New York, we do an interview and we publish that in Dialogue. So that's what we did. And it's a good interview. It's worth going back and looking at it if you haven't read it before. Andrew could have come out with his guns blazing, and I think with some justification, because the role of the Mormon Church in passing Prop 8 was not exemplary. But he chose instead to spend about half the interview talking about his own story, coming to terms with his own sexuality, but not until he was in his mid-20s. He said, I really didn't understand that I was gay until then. And I've seen this many times, that particularly with gay men, there are a lot who don't come to that full realization until they're in their 20s, whereas there are others who can't remember a time when they didn't know they were gay. The other half of the interview, he talked about Mormonism and its relationship to its LGBTQ members and to the broader LGBTQ world. But the lasting phrase that he gave, which I think was just terrific, is John and I, John's his husband, have found in our marriage a level of happiness that we did not think was possible. And then he said, I don't understand why the Mormon Church or any church would want to deprive us of that level of happiness. And that really puts the discussion on a different level than you've normally heard it, and certainly different, I think, than anything you've ever heard in a church context. That if we really do believe in families, if we do believe that happiness is the object and design of our existence, why would we as a church want to inflict pain on people rather than helping to facilitate their attaining true happiness through their marriage? So that was the beginning of my consciousness being raised. That was 2008. And it really took, another 6 years, probably, maybe even a little longer than that, for me gradually to come to the realization that this was not only an important topic, but that it was a topic that had not been effectively treated in print, the topic being the relationship of the LDS Church to the issue, uh, and that maybe this was the next important project that I should take on. It was not something that I did in haste, but once it dawned on me that it was of the level of importance that it needed to be done, then it weighed on me more heavily than the other 3 books that I'd written. I knew that I had to get this thing out quicker than my normal schedule, which was 8 to 9 years per book. This one, from start to finish, probably took between 4 and 5. On the front end, I was commingling it with finishing up the Leonard Arrington biography. The pamphlet that Stephanie held up was the text of the McMurrin lecture that I gave at the University of Utah, and it was solely on the issue of the biology of homosexuality. That was not a hard sell for me. I'm a biologist. I've been in the biology game professionally for almost a half century now. I didn't have all of the dots connected until I started to really dig into the research with a big assist from Bill Bradshaw, who gave me some of the key review articles to get started with, and then I did my own digging. But nothing that I found surprised me. It was just a question of, all right, how do we connect those dots, not do the dots, or can the dots be connected? The surprises that I found in researching and writing the book were more along the lines of what the church has done over the years, how much damage to a culture and to individuals it has done through the years, and how little accountability there has been along the way. And all of that seemed to me to rest on a foundation of denial of science. That if this is biological, then that jerks the rug from all of the policies and even the doctrines that the church has been preaching forever, as long as it's been handling this subject, which really goes back to the 1960s. And if in fact this is biological, then you have to remove that foundation and start to build a new structure on it, one that acknowledges that this is not a choice, that it's something that is permanently imprinted, that it's unchangeable, and it's perfectly fine if we believe at all in a God and God having children and loving those children. So that was the surprise to me in this whole thing, as to really how awful that story has been almost consistently along the way. I hadn't dug into the weeds on that. Going back and reading, I think it's chapter 6 of The Miracle of Forgiveness, which was neither, and seeing how draconian the language of Spencer Kimball was, and just imagining, and then later verifying by talking particularly to gay men, how much damage that book did, and probably how many suicides that book caused. Just reading it now, whether you're straight or gay, should make anybody cringe. And yet that was considered quasi-canonical, because here's a man who 4 years after he published that book became the president of the church. And you all know in Mormon culture what that means, that we give to a president of the church retroactive sanctification. So it's almost as if anything he ever said or wrote, regardless of when in his life, is considered to be canonical. And there it is. Finally, that book was taken out of circulation or taken out of print, but way too late in the game. So that's how I got into it. I think this is a good time to start to talk with you instead of to you. So please start asking the questions that you want to hear.
Does anyone have a question?